Hello to everybody. Peter, of course, it's a real pleasure to be here with you again. So what I'm going to do with you this afternoon or in the coming 25 minutes, and I heard already that this morning you have had very interesting discussions on performance management. Well, I'm going to focus on, let's call it a very basic and hands-on topic, being base pay and base pay increases, because we tend to forget from time to time that it also still exists, even though total rewards is extremely important. But I'm going to focus on merit pay, and let's call it in a new performance management era. So I'm going to show also you a little bit some results of a questionnaire we have done with you beforehand. Not doing anything about commercials, but just telling you that Vlerick Business School is an academic business school located in Belgium, but also with an international focus. And I dare to say with quite a rich tradition in the field of reward management. Now, what I want to do with you is, in fact, the main target or the main objective of my presentation is to confront research and practice, to see whether there are any lines of cohesion, but maybe also to see whether there are any things where we can see differences. So, of course, being an academic, let me start with providing you with some learnings from academic research, but don't panic. I will do this in an accessible way, okay? So I will speak business language. Now, first of all, of course, always interesting, the older you get, the more you see the importance of going back to the roots and how important history can be. So if you look at what merit pay is about, well, apparently it has its origin in behavioral psychology. And that is one of the things I also want to mention to you, because I too often see that in the field of reward management, we might not always have enough competencies in the field of psychology and behavioral psychology. We tend to think quite technically, and of course it's a technical area, but behavioral psychology can also be quite an important one. So in fact, merit pay increases were first applied, it's quite a long time ago, more than 100 years ago. And then since then, so it was about, okay, what is the logic we can find, we can use behind drivers of pay increases? Yeah, and what you see in general is what is used, seniority, merit being linking pay increases with performance. And also, and that's a very interesting discussion. So I live in Belgium, and here in Belgium, we have an automatic cost of living adjustment, which is not the case in other countries. But also, of course, it plays its role in determining base pay increases. Now, here I am with a first result of a study. And this study has looked at what is the impact of different pay systems on, let's call it performance, yeah, future employee performance. Now, I want to mention to you that it's very important. The few studies I'm going to present you, these are studies which have been published in top academic journals. And I can tell you that there is a quality check which might take more than 2 years before you end up in such a journal. So you can really trust that things have been controlled for, because there are always a number of control factors and so on. So what this study has found is that the impact of different pay systems on performance, the impact of variable pay is larger than the impact of merit pay, which in itself proves that people are not, as we call it, homo economicus. Because if you ask it to me, I'm an economist, I would prefer merit pay, because merit pay lasts over the time, and also in quite a lot of cases, your merit pay and your base pay also determines your pension plan and so on. But apparently, the fact that getting a certain and higher amount of money on your bank account once a year has a bigger impact than, well, for example, concretely having 1,200 euros on your bank account at once has a bigger impact on your performance than having 120 euros extra each month. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and that is an important one, I think, to keep in mind, this study also looked at the trend in pay. So what have been the pay increases, the bonuses in the past? And apparently, if people have a high merit trend or a high bonus trend, for example, meaning that you got important pay increases over the last years, you got a rather high bonus over the last years, then in fact its impact decreases. That means that well, to some extent, we need to surprise from time to time, but not always in a negative way. But in many cases, bonuses and merit pay might be a little bit more too easy to predict. Another important finding is the element of what we call procedural justice. And certainly in merit pay, the element of justice counts. And Jason Shaw, who is really a top academic in the field of reward management, he says, and Peter, I think that also goes back maybe to the discussion this morning, but in any case, his input is just having the line manager decide on the performance rating would not be a good idea. And for that reason, so he mentions what are important factors which determine people's feeling of justice with their pay is, well, do they have the feeling that decisions taken by, for example, line managers can be challenged? And also, importantly, whether the views of all, including the employee, but maybe also colleagues, are heard and included, and not that much the views on the pay, but also the views on the performance of the person. So that is a study which has taken a look at that procedural justice. So another very important study is this one, and it looks at executive remuneration, but we can have learnings from that also from a broader perspective. What you see here, I'm going to explain that to you, is the inverse U-shape. So that is very important. And what this study looks at, it looks at the impact of the extent to which incentives are explicit, meaning driven by very explicit weightings, driven by very explicit performance measures, and then saying, okay, if you have this result, then this will be the payout. So a very formulaic system. And this study has found that from a low incentive explicitness to a medium incentive explicitness, performance goes up. But if you overdo it, if your whole system becomes too mathematical and too formulaic, then apparently the performance impact decreases. And this clearly shows that pay for performance, in fact, has two main, well, I would call it messages. The first one is a controlling message, and that is if we overdo it. So if that we consider people to be programmable by a bonus formula and then we press on enter and the things will work, that is not the case. So that can make it demotivating. But if you have a lower to medium as incentive explicitness, for example, providing line managers with degrees of freedom and so on, apparently that might also have a positive impact on pay fairness. Yeah. Another thing is, and that is something from the perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we should be very cautious about, is the element of what does merit pay lead to, for example, unequal pay. And this study has shown that in organizations where you have meritocracy, meaning where line managers have absolute degrees of freedom to decide upon pay increases, well, apparently in those organizations, you have higher unequal pay, female versus male employees, and also minority groups versus majority groups. That means that this is quite a dangerous one. And this study also shows that we can, of course, meritocracy still makes sense, but here we have a huge need to provide the managers and the decision makers with data. Yeah, for example, providing them with an overview on where people are in their salary bands, taking into account gender issues and so on and so forth, to really bring that to the front. Yeah, so relevant pay data should be made available certainly to the decision makers, and where they can see the pay history and so on and so forth. And of course also that some procedures are being developed to bring that to the forefront. Yeah, so it could, in theory, it could look like meritocracy is great. We pay people for their individual performance. But if you do that in practice without any controls, we have seen in the past in studies that female employees put less pressure on pay. And of course, then the outcome is that the male employees might get higher increases if you do not make a combination between, I would call it, reward analytics. And this is really a plea to also pay more attention to that issue. Then if we move to a next study, and this is also a very important one I want to share with you. This is an international study focusing on what is the smallest meaningful pay increase. And here you see, and let's not discuss about 1%, but apparently under a 5% pay increase, a pay increase has no impact. And what I mean by impact is that people take it with them, that they say, okay, well, this is substantial. Not I'm going to change my effort, but I will do even more my best, and so on, so that the message really gets through. I'm going to feed back to practice. In fact, it means that the overall majority of the pay increases you give in your organization, 1%, 2%, 2.5%, are a waste of money. Why? Because they do not have an impact. Yeah. So then that brings me to the last element here in the theoretical dimension, because for me, if we look at merit pay, the key message here and the key thing to be taken into account is what we call equity and fairness. It's about justice. And in fact, justice is being fed by three elements: distributive justice, then I'm taking a look here procedural justice and interactional justice. What does it mean? Distributive justice: is my pay fair compared with others? I'm going to explain that. Procedural justice is about, is my pay fairly determined? And interactional justice then is, am I treated with politeness by my manager? Okay. Now, looking at the distributive and the procedural justice, this is in fact what drives people's feeling about their fairness with pay. And I have the conviction that paying people above the market might also be a waste of money, notwithstanding the fact that it can be related to upper performance, then you can do so. But in overall saying we want to have a pay strategy which is clearly above the market might not always the best one. What is key for the people is that they feel fairly treated with pay. And in distributive justice, so if I look at my pay and in order to judge the fairness, I look at pay relative to my responsibilities, my education, my experience, my effort, and so on. That is what drives distributive justice. But let's not forget either about the procedural justice. Then we look at the people's feeling about, are consistent rules being used? Is there ethical decision making? Is accurate information used? Don't forget, is my input obtained prior? Is there an opportunity to modify decisions? And are the reasons behind pay decisions explained? So this is the total picture about what determines people's fairness with pay. And for me, this discussion is a much more important one than the ever-returning discussion on whether pay motivates or not. If this is not okay, then it will strongly demotivate. If this is okay, you will see that the extrinsic and the intrinsic rewards can really go hand in hand. Now, learning from you, second part. So what we have done, and again, I'm very happy with that, we have sent out a questionnaire in the Teneo network, and there we have got 52 reactions from 52 companies, with large companies, global companies, so I think highly relevant for you as audience. Let me walk you through some of the results. First of all, 76% of you seem still to give an overall performance score to individuals, and out of these 76%, a little bit more than half use the performance score directly to determine base pay increases. If I take a look, and this is sort of personal synthesis, if I take a look at what I see in practice and in research, I think it's not a good idea anymore to say your performance is being summarized into one score, and that one score is being used as the input for the bonus formula or for the merit formula, and that will have an impact on your pay increase, and that will determine it. But I'm going to come back on that one. Now, what we do see is here you see it. So 76% have the performance score, and then the scale. It's in most cases a 5-point scale. There are some exceptions. If we take a look at the information which is set available to the decision maker, by the way, very important for you to know here, we talk about pay increases for the management population. Yeah, we are not talking about operational employees nor blue collars. We are talking about the management population. And here you see which information those managers, supervisors get as background information for their decisions on pay. And you see that in 73%, the compa ratio is being provided, which can be discussed, of course, because for me it's quite strange that in 27% of the cases, the management has to take decisions without even knowing where people are in the salary range. Information on current performance, but what you also see, and here I think we have a direct confrontation with with justice theory. At the bottom, you see input by employees, colleagues. Well, that is an input which is almost not taken into account, which is, of course, a bit unfortunate if we link that to pay fairness elements. Yeah. So then, which information is communicated then to the managers? And here I mean not the supervisors, but the managers themselves getting the pay increases. Here you see, and I thought this was interesting to share with you, that in 25% of the cases, 1 out of 4 get the compa ratio, 23% only get a broader view on the range in the pay band. And we also see that providing information on the minimum, the maximum, and the midpoint is rather exceptional. So the performance score is provided, but in general, you see that, well, if we talk about transparency, well, here we see that the percentages are still at the lower end. Yeah. Then some concrete data. This is confronting. I just told you that 5% is the smallest meaningful pay increase. And here you see, well, we have asked you, what are the average salary increases? But this is average overall employees. You see that in the absolute majority of the cases, certainly for companies in the EMEA and Europe context, it is within 2 to 3%. You could say, but if that amount of money is given to the minority of employees, you might still be able to give them 5% or more. But unfortunately enough, that is not the case, because you told us that 70% out of your companies give a pay increase to more than 80% of the managers. And that is a question, and that is a habit I want to put into question. Does it really make sense to give 80% or even more of your managers an increase of something like 2 to 3%? Apparently not, if we take a look at studies. Then briefly, your opinions on performance assessment and evaluation scores. And here you see, should it result in an overall evaluation score? You tend to agree. If you look, and this is a very interesting finding, there seems to be, and I do not know, Peter, to what extent this already has been solved in the discussions this morning, but what you see here is that there is no unanimity at all on the use of performance ratings in order to be able to determine base pay increases. Yeah. So here you clearly see that there is some people agree with that, but some people also clearly disagree with this finding. Should there be a direct mathematical link between performance evaluation and pay? We see that you tend to the left-hand side. Then line managers having important degrees of freedom. Well, you do not really agree. You are a little bit in the middle. You are a little bit doubting on that element. Yeah. And then an interesting one here. Average to good performers should get a pay increase every year. So here you see that you tend to agree, which for me feels uncomfortable, because here you say that, okay, people that perform quite well, almost all of them will get an increase, which will make us end up with a lot of people receiving a rather small increase, because that is what you see here. Most companies have the tendency to grant annual pay increases. Yeah. So taking into account the timing here, I just want to focus on the lowest scores. And you see in our organization, individuals input is obtained or peer input is obtained. Well, here you see that this is not a common habit today. If we talk about participative management, I think there is a way to go there. Just want to show you very briefly 5 examples I have collected over time which show you how different the approach towards merit can be. This is what we could call quite a formulaic approach. Now, what is good about this merit matrix is that it really differentiates. So you see a lot of zeros, and you also see even 8.8%. Yeah, that's the first element. So that is good. But on the other hand, you see all the different cells you have to tick. You also see, by the way, the difference between a good performer and an outstanding performance. For example, somebody below the median goes from 3.9 to 6%. That means that you put a lot of pressure on your performance rating. Yeah, I'm going to come back on other examples, because what this company does here, they are not going to take a look at the position in the salary scale. They just tell the managers, okay, we give you some recommendations. High performer, well, a merit increase, you get a fork and you get the flexibility, and it's your decision. In the previous example, that was much less the case. And what happens here is, this is the Excel sheet the managers get in this company, and they get information on the comp ratio, the current salary, and then they have to fill out the merit percentage those people get, taking into account what you have seen here on the previous slide. Case number 3, here you see a 9-box grid. In fact, you see this is quite granular. It takes into account the relative salary position, and you see all different formats. And of course, well, the easy thing is that, in fact, the line manager's own degree of freedom is what is the performance rating and what is the potential, because the model says it all. What I see, however, in practice today is that there is more and more some sort of reluctance towards doing it this way. On the contrary, in this case, what you see here, and this is, by the way, also set in collective bargaining agreement, here the managers get the message, you can give a salary increase in the range of 0 and 7. Between 0 and 7, it's up to you to decide, but we keep the budget under control, and these are the 3 criteria you need to take into account. And you are going to make a narrative. You are going to send us at least a 1-pager providing information on why you present this salary increase to the managers. And by the way, also you will get information on where people are in their salary band. Last example, and then I come to the conclusion. In this company, there is a very strong link with the market. So this is a company that says, we do not want to provide increases with 2.5%. We only get increases by 5%. People that perform solidly get an increase every 2 years, not every year anymore, but you have the possibility to grant monthly increases, but you have to stay within the budget. And here you see managers get a detailed overview of all the people in their team, also where they are in the market, so their relative salary position, and it's up to them. They have to decide within the budgetary constraints. I think what I like here is that in those 5 cases, you see how differently you can act related to merit pay. So let me then conclude by confronting research and practice. And I have 3 elements here. Of course, I hope that there are more takeaways, but 3 elements here. First of all, academic research learns that the smallest meaningful pay increase is 5%. What we see in practice today is that you give average increases around 2.5% granted to 80% of the managers. So this really is a confrontation. And there you could ask yourself the question, are we really spending our euros, dollars, whatever, well? Second one is academic research learns don't overdo explicitness, while we see that today still 75% are using a performance rating. And last but not least, academic research learns that in order to make people have a fair experience with reward, the voices of all should be heard as an input. Well, here only 14% out of you is agreeing that peer input is obtained in the salary increase process, and that only in not even in half of the firms employees are really able to use and to raise their voice. Yeah. And very lastly, and these are a couple of examples, what would you like to change? And I have seen quite a couple of times there that quite some of you would like to see more freedom and empowerment to the line managers, and also maybe moving away from annual increases, maybe to ongoing increases or also less frequent ones. Now, my main conclusion is, my main suggestion is, in order to make merit pay impactful, we need to give larger increases to fewer people and less frequent in time. So, Mr. Chairman, that was my message.
Yeah, fantastic, as always. And it reminds me, Tom Hark did a presentation earlier, and one of the things he told us we need to ask ourselves is, are we connected with the science? In other words, do we have the inputs we need to manage what we're trying to manage effectively? And I think you've reminded us that there is data available. And if we were to look at it, we would probably do things differently. And it's kind of amazing that there's such a low input into this process, which causes a lot of anxiety and emotional reaction amongst people. And no wonder why when we see some of the results. Now, on the Q&A, there is a bit of a question about inflation. Now, how would you normalize your 5%? I know in Belgium you've got inflation taken care of because you get an automatic increase, and therefore merit of 5% is kind of genuine. But how would you trade off the 5% with inflation rates?
Yeah, well, so what has happened in the study I have shown is, in fact, this is a multi-country study. And what has happened is the following. So they just took a look at what was the pay increase people got. So they have studied people's satisfaction before the pay increase and after the pay increase. And of course, if the inflation goes together or comes together with the moment of the salary increase, then it is in there, then it is in there. However, if it is at another moment in the year, and if you would get, for example, 2 increases, which could also be the case, then that is not accounted for. Yeah. So, but that makes certainly the job much more difficult if you have that automatic cost of living adjustment. In any case, I think it proves that it's better to really have the two together rather than really separated, because then you might end up with very small increases 2 times a year, which makes it even less impactful.
Yeah. So really, your lesson of this is fewer people should get more meaningful increases less often. And that makes the money go further, which I think is a really great insight. Now, Xavier, while you put on your chairman's suit, I know you've brought a special suit of clothing with you to wear. I'll introduce Alexander just to allow you to catch your breath and get going, and then I'll disappear into the background. And
Thank
I'll be
you,
back
Peter.
again later.